The stale stench hit Marcus Reynolds before the tray even landed. Wrapped in airline plastic, the sandwich was clearly spoiled green mold creeping along its edges. He hadn't said a word yet, but Claire Wilson, the flight attendant, was already turning away, her smirk unmistakable. The rest of the first-class cabin dined on salmon and white wine. He got moldy bread. What Claire didn't know, what no one on that plane knew, was that Marcus wasn't just a passenger. He was a part owner of Elite Airways, and he had installed the very surveillance system now recording every whispered slur, every dismissive glance, every calculated insult. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply tapped his tablet, sending a quiet signal to legal and HR, then leaned back in his seat as if nothing had happened. Because this wouldn't end with a complaint form. It would end with accountability. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget, Marcus Reynolds adjusted his tailored navy suit jacket as the seatbelt sign blinked overhead. The plane was now cruising smoothly at 37,000 feet, but the tension in the first-class cabin sat low and heavy like unspoken static. He glanced sideways at the untouched sandwich on his tray, the bread now curling with rot, the cup of lukewarm juice sweating with indifference. Across the aisle, Mr. Whitman, an older white gentleman, sipped a glass of Montrachet and forked seared salmon into his mouth without interruption. His tray glistened with polished silverware, folded linen, and respect. Marcus's tray, by contrast, looked like an afterthought, a mistake no one intended to correct. But Marcus knew better. This wasn't a mistake. Claire Wilson, the flight attendant, returned briefly to offer fresh bread to the row behind him. She didn't glance in his direction. When she passed, the sharp scent of her perfume followed like a signature, assertive, intentional, and cold. Marcus leaned slightly to the side, pulling his tablet from the seat pocket and tapping into the airline's encrypted app, an app only accessible to select members of Elite Airways' executive board. As a silent partner and systems architect, he had designed the back-end surveillance with a precise goal to identify service gaps, unconscious bias, and crew misconduct in premium cabins. Today, he had stumbled upon something worse than bias. He scrolled through the internal logs. 4 service complaints in the past 6 months from passengers seated in 2A, all filed by minority travelers, all dismissed with generic apologies. Resolved with goodwill, voucher 1 read. No action, needed another. But one note stood out. Passenger claimed meal difference, assigned to F.A. Claire Wilson. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. His fingers hovered above the onboard chat function, then paused. Now wasn't the time to act rashly. Now was the time to document. Behind the galley curtain, a low laugh broke through the unmistakable laugh of someone laughing at, not with. He didn't need to hear the words to understand the tone. Claire was enjoying herself. He tapped a note to Jessica, his executive assistant. Begin silent log of F.A. Wilson. Pull prior complaints. Flag security timestamp at 12:34 p.m. Food served to 2A. Suspected pattern. A reply pinged back instantly. Confirmed. Will notify HR discreetly. Surveillance feed logging. Proceeding cautiously. He closed the app, returned the tablet to its case, and picked up the sandwich again, not to eat, but to confirm. He peeled back the top slice gently. The mold was unmistakable. Green specks spreading across the bread like decay made visible. He replaced the top and slid the tray aside. This wasn't about hunger. It was about principle. Suddenly, Michael, the second attendant, appeared at his row, eyes glazed with disinterest. "Can I help you with anything?" he asked in a tone that suggested the opposite. "Yes," Marcus replied, keeping his voice level. "I'd like to speak with the purser. About my meal." Michael blinked. "Claire handles this section." "I'm aware," Marcus said, "which is why I'd like someone else." A pause. Michael's gaze tightened, then he disappeared into the galley without another word. Passengers nearby had begun to notice. The woman in 2B peeked at his tray, then whispered to her husband. Marcus saw their reactions, the polite discomfort, the curiosity they didn't want to show, but couldn't entirely suppress. The disparity was too obvious. The sandwich too visibly wrong. The curtain parted again. Claire stepped out. "Sir," she said stiffly, "our records show no special meal was ordered for you. This is what's available." "That's incorrect," Marcus replied, tapping his phone screen and holding it up. Confirmation email. McAllen, 18. Chef's seafood plate. Dietary preference logged and accepted. Claire didn't even glance at the screen. "Our system sometimes overbooks. You're welcome to file a formal complaint after landing." "I intend to," Marcus said calmly, "and I'll be including the footage from your galley conversation about these people." The color drained slightly from her face, but she recovered quickly. "That's a very serious accusation." "No," Marcus replied. "It's a very accurate observation. And if you'd like, I can have legal explain the surveillance policy your contract acknowledges on page 17. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her eyes narrowed. "You don't know who you're dealing with," she hissed. Marcus smiled slightly. "That's what you should have considered before serving moldy food in a monitored cabin." She turned and stormed back behind the curtain. But it was already too late. The damage was done. The humiliation, while quiet, had been broadcast through every unspoken cue, every disrespectful decision, and now through every witness seated in first class. What Claire didn't understand was that Marcus had played this game before built systems watched cultures shift from within. She had mistaken silence for weakness. But he wasn't the one exposed. She was. Marcus sat still in his seat, the sandwich untouched, the tension thickening like fog. Around him, silence was no longer neutral. It was curious. It was watchful. First-class passengers, business travelers, retirees, elite flyers were beginning to take notice of the discrepancy, and once they noticed, they couldn't unsee it. Mr. Whitman, the silver-haired banker across the aisle, leaned slightly in his seat, his fork pausing mid-air. He hadn't spoken yet, but his body language was saying everything. He was assessing, measuring, watching. 2 rows ahead, a young woman with an airline platinum tag clipped to her handbag whispered something to her partner, glancing back toward Marcus's tray. Even the woman in 1D, who had been immersed in a hardcover novel for most of the flight, now peeked over the rim of her glasses, catching sight of the clearly decaying sandwich. Marcus didn't need sympathy. What he needed was clarity. And slowly it was emerging. The curtain to the galley rustled again. Claire didn't come out this time, Michael did. His face carried a veneer of professionalism, but it was stretched thin over the condescension underneath. "We've consulted with the purser," he began, standing just to the side of Marcus's seat, but loud enough for neighboring passengers to hear. "There was a miscommunication. The crew regrets any inconvenience." "No apology?" Marcus asked, looking him dead in the eye. Michael blinked, unsure how to respond. "No correction. No fresh meal. Just regrets." Marcus continued, keeping his tone low, but unmistakably pointed. "As I said, sir, You've served a platinum elite, customer-spoiled food," Marcus interrupted. "You've dismissed confirmation records. You've responded to documented service issues with excuses. And now you're standing here pretending this is an inconvenience. That's not how any of this works." From across the aisle, Whitman spoke up for the first time. "Actually, I'd like to chime in." Michael turned, startled. "Sir, I've flown this route twice a month for 12 years. I've never seen a Platinum Elite member receive a meal like that in first class," Whitman said, gesturing toward Marcus's tray. "And I've certainly never seen a complaint handled this poorly." Michael shifted on his feet. "We appreciate your concern, Mr. Whitman," the banker replied curtly. "And I'm not just concerned. I'm embarrassed. I recognize this gentleman," he added, now turning fully toward Marcus. "You're Marcus Reynolds, aren't you, Reynolds? Technologies?" Marcus inclined his head slightly. "The man who helped digitize the Department of Commerce and restructured Citibank's global data infrastructure." Whitman's voice was now projecting across the cabin. More heads turned. "That's right," Marcus said, "though I'd prefer not to be recognized mid-flight." Well, Sir Whitman replied, I think you've earned the right to be recognized, especially when you're being treated with this level of disrespect. A few passengers nodded. Someone in 3B muttered disgraceful under their breath. The murmurs were spreading now, quiet, but growing. Michael stiffened. Sir, with all due respect, the crew's handling this to the best of our ability. Then your ability needs an overhaul, Whitman snapped. Marcus didn't smile, though he was tempted. Instead, he turned his attention to his tablet again. With a few taps, he forwarded an internal message through the executive system. Subject: Real-time escalation. Elite. 347. Experiencing discriminatory service on board. Multiple witnesses. Crew escalation now visible to passengers. Requesting live response at Denver or alternate. Begin preparation for public response. Jessica's reply was instant HR legal and PR alerted. Diane standing by. FAA compliance team notified RE diversion possibility. Do you want immediate intervention or post-landing resolution? Marcus typed. Prepare both. I'll assess by T45. Begin pulling all audio surveillance from the last 40 minutes. Meanwhile, Michael retreated to the galley, face taut. Passengers were now openly exchanging comments. The woman in 1D leaned toward Marcus and whispered, I saw what they gave you. That's not just bad service. That's something else. I know, Marcus replied. Thank you. The PA system crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're currently cruising at 37,000 feet and on schedule for arrival in San Francisco. Please remain seated as we begin in-flight service shortly. A generic announcement. But Marcus heard the subtext. They were hoping the incident would fade into cabin white noise, that he would let it go. But that wasn't going to happen. He reopened the surveillance feed from his seat's encrypted terminal. Video was clear. Audio even clearer. And in that moment, he caught something Claire behind the curtain whispering. He probably used a diversity upgrade to get here. These people always want to act like they belong. Marcus tapped, save segment timestamp 1348. This wasn't over. This was just beginning. Ben trong kuang hang nat yen lang nu mot fong shuan. Tat ka diu dang e huakit nat da kam nan rang diu gido sa hondang dienra. Kong kon la mot bua an hong. Kong chi la mot yu ka bitu choi. Dai la sukiem tra ran gioi va Marcus Reynolds da buok kwano. An kong noi gian kong onao. They vao do an lam dieu quen thuok voi, nung guoi tong bikoi ne trong hung kan fong quien luk an bat lai bang su kiem soat tuyet doi. Du kong I hoi kong I quan tam truok de. Marcus bat dao no lai kon duong dua an den chiek ge tua ne chiek ge ma Claire Wilson, cho rang an kong du tu kachengoi. Tuoi tho ando south side. Chicago kong pai laban li lich, li tuong cho CEO. Me an dai tiu hokcha an la do dien kong bang kap. Nung trong ngoinan no do gia trivetri thuk kien tan vadan du da duok kak sao vao mau. Ki Marcus duok hok bong vao mit moi ngoi goi an la truong hop dak biet. Ki an dan dat kong ti koin hiep dao tien kwa kuok kung huang.com ngoi ta goi do la me man. Ki an say dung Reynolds Technologies dan tap don da kwok giava morong sang. Lin vuk hang kong ho lai noi ant la mot vidu hiem hoi. Kong ai tung goi ant la sung dang. Tren me be luk ne Claire kong chi tu choi puk vu mot swatan. Ko ta dang koi de, nung du chan tu ka mot doi, Marcus pai chung min su ton tai kwa min la hop le. Van hu moi lan kak an kong kan la het de chung min diu do. Mot tieng beep ne fatra tu tablet. Tin han moi tu Jessica HR confirmed Claire Wilson named in 5 formal complaints. 3 dismissed as unverified. 2 resolved with minor vouchers. 1 internal note from Flight 228B. Passenger alleged racially biased tone during service. We flagged pattern, Marcus gone prepare package for board. Include pattern history, plus flight surveillance audio. Begin documentation under Ethics Protocol 9. An nga lung vao ge. Luk nai kong chi lamot han kach dang bifuk vute. Malamot hithong da de chuyen ne se ranu lanva Elite Airways se fai traloi video do. Quagok matant te Claire buok rakoi man che lan ne kong kon ngao man nu truok. Mat kota kong do va kole koda biet rang diu gido dang cho min ki me be hakan. Marcus Kong Len Tieng. Tai Vao Do Ong Whitman Hu Mot Dai Dien Quan Hung Ngoi Duok Doi Su Dong Lai Len Tieng. Miss Wilson Ong Goi Ngan Gon Hung Ro Rang. I'd like to file a formal statement regarding what I've witnessed today. Your conduct, your tone, and your refusal to provide adequate service all unacceptable. Claire Suai Lai Guang Koi Nu the Che Di Noi Lo Trong An Mat. Sir, I assure you, you don't need to assure me of anything, Whitman Kat Loy. You need to explain it to the boardroom full of people who'll see the footage soon. Kong Ki Kuang Hang Nat Nu Dong Kung. Marcus Nin Dong Ho. Tin Tu Thoi Diem Chiek Sandwich Duok Dat Shuang Moi Chi 47 Put Troi Kwa. An Lai Dien Thoi Bam Gui Mot Tin Han Dian. Begin escalation protocol. Wrote Denver. Request gate prep, internal review team ready. ETA 1 Wench 20. Full HR legal presence needed. Captain likely to resist. Prepare PR hold response. Claire Louis Vau Manche Lan Ne Nan Hon. Michael Tro Lai Mat. Mei Nan Enho. Mr. Reynolds. Antha Noi Go Magiati. We'd like to offer you a complimentary upgrade to Next Flight's International Suite, plus a $500 voucher. Marcus Nin Ankta Nu the Vua Bishuk Pham Lan Nua. I didn't ask for compensation an Noi Cham Rai. I asked for equal treatment. And now I'll be asking for accountability. Vad dong kwan kak do kiloi noi do buang ramot ngoi kako hang wana dong day. Mot fu nutrong nien da now al blazer, nananan, an mat saksao. Excuse me, Konoi, I'm also a platinum member, and I've had similar experiences before. Maybe not as blatant, but I've always felt lesser. I never filed a complaint, but I wish I had. Marcus gat thou. It's not too late. Vananong han kach kak batao di tam. Claire kong biat kovua kong chi suk fam mot han kach. Kovua chok val trong tam kwa mot de doi van homachin ko kong du tu kach de chong lai. The intercom buzzed with a click that sounded almost nervous. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain's voice came through unsteady under its practiced cadence. We're experiencing some slight turbulence and will ask that all passengers remain seated with seatbelts fastened for the next 20 minutes. Cabin service will resume shortly. Marcus stared at the speaker overhead. The timing wasn't coincidence. It was containment. They were trying to freeze the situation, stalling any further public conversation, hoping the silence would settle back in like fog after a storm. But the silence was gone. The cabin was no longer passive. Word was spreading like sparks across dry leaves. A passenger 2 rows back whispered to her husband, "He's a board member." Someone else had pulled out their phone, opening up the Elite Airways app to recheck flight crew names. The atmosphere had shifted from, "Let's mind our own business," to "This concerns us all." Across the aisle, Whitman remained still, but his expression had hardened no longer, just curious, now protective. Marcus leaned forward and tapped his tablet again. He was done being watched. Now it was time to act. He opened the Executive Crisis Protocol dashboard, a system only accessible to board members and senior executives. With a few taps, he pulled the current incident into a live monitoring folder, tagging it under Potential Discrimination Event, Level 3. From here, the legal HR and operations chain would be notified. He uploaded the surveillance clip of Claire's whispered comments behind the curtain. "These people need to learn their place," and attached it to the flag. A confirmation pinged back. Incident ID AA347, Discrim 2025, WER5 status, escalated to legal review, pending HR intervention. The plane hummed beneath them, but Marcus knew that above that hum, systems were now spinning. Review queues were firing up. Internal Slack channels in HR were pinging awake. By the time they landed, a full investigative path would be waiting. Michael returned more tense now, his lips pressed in a tight line. "Mr. Reynolds," he said cautiously, "the captain would like a word. In private." "Could I invite you to the galley?" Marcus didn't flinch. Anything the captain needs to say, he can say in the cabin. In front of witnesses. Michael hesitated. "With all due respect, sir, we're trying to avoid escalation." "I'm not escalating," Marcus replied calmly. "I'm documenting." A passenger too rose up, turned around, and nodded slightly, a silent show of support. Others began murmuring again. Michael looked around, clearly realizing the ground was shifting beneath his feet. "I'll inform the captain," he said, before disappearing once again. Moments later, the purser emerged, a woman with tight features and an expression crafted for damage control. "Mr. Reynolds," she said professionally, "we apologize for the substandard service you've received. We take all feedback seriously, and the airline will be conducting a full review." Marcus looked at her, unimpressed. "You're not apologizing for the service," he said. "You're apologizing because people are watching." Her jaw tightened. "That's not true, sir. We're committed to inclusivity," Marcus cut in. "Don't recite corporate values you're unwilling to enforce." She inhaled sharply, caught off guard by his refusal to play along. "You're being treated differently, not because of what you value," he said, gesturing towards the spoiled sandwich still sitting cold on his tray, "but because of who you are. Because someone in this crew decided I didn't belong in this seat." The purser's eyes flicked to the other passengers, now openly listening. "I don't want platitudes," Marcus said. "I want transparency. I want accountability. And I want it on record that if this flight gets diverted, it wasn't because of any safety issue. It was because a paying passenger dared to demand fair treatment." A heavy pause followed. Then the voice of Captain Hoffman crackled over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, as a precaution, we're initiating a deviation from our scheduled route. We'll be landing in Denver for a brief inspection due to an unresolved cabin issue. We expect to resume travel to San Francisco shortly after." Murmurs surged like a wave. Marcus didn't even react. He simply tapped out a message, "Diversion confirmed. Secure HR legal presence in Denver. Ground coordination in motion. Prepare public-facing documentation protocol." Jessica replied within seconds, "Diane will meet aircraft at gate. Board notified. Press hold activated." Passengers were now openly concerned. A woman near the front turned to Marcus and asked, "They're landing because of you, aren't they?" He nodded calmly. "Because I asked why I was served spoiled food." And in that moment, the true disruption was no longer Marcus. It was the lie the airline was trying to sell. This wasn't turbulence. This was truth. And it was forcing the plane to descend. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the aircraft began its descent into Denver. The engine hum deepened, the flaps shifted with a mechanical groan, and the nose tipped downward ever so slightly. For most passengers, it was just another landing. But Marcus knew exactly what this landing meant, and more importantly, why it was happening. This wasn't about safety. This was a strategic retreat, a calculated maneuver to neutralize the threat Marcus now posed, cloaked under the pretense of technical protocol. Claire and Michael remained behind the galley curtain, but their silhouettes were animated, gesturing, arguing, and clearly unraveling under pressure. From his seat, Marcus could make out snippets of raised voices over the descending aircraft's growl. Why did he have the footage? "You told me there were no cameras. HR is going to crucify us for this." Marcus remained still. No reaction. Let them panic. His tablet chimed again. Jessica had sent a fresh update. "Diane and full HR response team confirmed at gate B17. Airport security has been briefed. Local press already pinging us for comment. Legal recommends internal memo go live in 20 minutes. He typed back, "Approve internal memo. Hold public response. Let reality land first." Across the aisle, Whitman leaned toward him again. "I have to ask," he said quietly, "how much of this did you plan for?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He looked out the window. Denver's dry mountains glinting with dusk in the distance. "Let's just say I've learned to expect turbulence," he said. "But no, I didn't plan this. I just prepared for it." Whitman nodded slowly. "Well, you've handled it better than I've seen most men handle a hostile board meeting." Marcus let out a soft exhale, something close to a laugh, though there was little humor in the moment. The plane dipped lower, the city's streetlights coming into view. The cabin was quiet now, filled with passengers locked in their own thoughts. Some confused, some tense, others simply watching Marcus like he held answers the crew refused to provide. Then the intercom snapped on again. Flight attendants prepare the cabin for arrival. Claire finally emerged from behind the curtain, her eyes scanning the cabin like she was preparing for battle. But when her gaze fell on Marcus, there was no longer contempt, only fear. Real, visible fear. She moved mechanically, checking seatbelts, avoiding eye contact with him, with Whitman, with anyone. And then she hesitated at 2A. Tray table secured, she asked, her voice barely audible. Marcus lifted his eyes. Secured, he said flatly. She turned and walked away without another word. The landing gear dropped with a thud beneath the plane. Gasps echoed quietly through the cabin. It was an abrupt reminder that they were actually landing early, diverted not by engine failure or weather, but by the fragile ego of a crew exposed. As the wheels touched down, the brakes hissed sharply, and reverse thrust roared outside. The aircraft slowed fast. Marcus felt the full weight of the moment press against him, not physically, but historically. This wasn't just a response to discrimination. It was a collision with the system designed to hide it. The aircraft rolled toward the gate, but there were no welcoming announcements. No cheery thank you for flying Elite Airways. Just silence. A chime sounded. Then the captain's voice, cool and forced. "We've arrived in Denver. Please remain seated until we complete security procedures. Thank you for your cooperation." Security procedures. That was the new spin. Beside him, Marcus's phone vibrated. A new message from Jessica confirmed surveillance footage downloaded. HR legal time-stamped all audio, including racial remarks. Chairman of the board monitoring live feed. FAA requested internal report by midnight. He typed only one word in reply proceed. The aircraft doors hissed as ground crew attached the jet bridge. Through the small windows, Marcus saw them. Diane Chen, head of HR, flanked by 2 Elite Airways executives, both in tailored Navy suits. There were airport officers nearby, but they were standing back, hands folded, non-confrontational, controlled. The cabin doors opened. Passengers craned their necks as Diane boarded first. She moved with calm authority, scanning each row until her eyes met Marcus's. "Mr. Reynolds," she said evenly, but with clear weight behind every syllable. "We need to speak. Privately, if you prefer." Marcus stood slowly. His voice was steady but clear. "No, we speak here." Passengers turned. Phones began recording. Claire, frozen near the galley, turned pale. Diane blinked once, nodded. "Very well." She cleared her throat and projected to the entire cabin. "We're here to address a formal complaint regarding discriminatory behavior by Elite Airways staff on this flight. We've reviewed preliminary surveillance footage, passenger reports, and internal data." She turned toward Claire and Michael, who both stiffened. "Effective immediately, you are suspended pending full investigation. Please collect your belongings and deplane." Gasps echoed through the cabin. Michael looked like he might faint. Claire opened her mouth, but Marcus stepped forward before she could speak. "Let me make something clear," he said, voice calm but firm. "This is not about revenge. This is about respect. What you do when you think no one is watching, that's who you really are. And unfortunately for you, someone was watching." Diane nodded in agreement. "Let's continue this conversation inside. Captain Hoffman has been asked to remain in the cockpit until legal arrives." Claire stared, lips trembling. But she said nothing. Michael followed her lead. The cabin fell quiet as they walked down the aisle past the same passengers they had once ignored, once smirked at, once judged. Now they were the ones being judged. And this time, the evidence spoke louder than excuses. The tension inside the aircraft didn't fade. After Claire and Michael were escorted off, it deepened. The kind of silence that follows not relief, but realization. A reckoning was happening in real time, and everyone left on board was now a witness to it. Marcus remained standing by seat 2A, the same seat that had become ground zero for what the media would soon call the first-class showdown. Diane Chen turned to him, clipboard in hand, flanked by her assistant and 2 silent HR observers. "Mr. "Reynolds," she said with practiced calm, "would you prefer to continue this conversation in the executive terminal lounge or—" "Here is fine," Marcus replied. "This isn't a private matter anymore." It never was. Diane gave a subtle nod. She understood the statement for what it was, a declaration of public accountability. "We've initiated immediate suspension protocols for both crew members," she continued. "Captain Hoffman's authority has been revoked for the remainder of the flight, and a replacement crew is being flown in from San Francisco to complete the journey." A few murmurs of approval broke out in the cabin. Someone clapped once before quickly stopping, uncertain if it was appropriate. But Marcus didn't acknowledge the sounds around him. His focus was on Diane's face. "Have the surveillance tapes been downloaded?" "Yes," she confirmed. "Our legal team is already reviewing them. Audio and video logs confirm multiple violations of Elite Airways' anti-discrimination policy." Additionally, the system flagged 5 prior complaints involving Ms. Wilson, none of which were properly escalated. "We've also pulled customer satisfaction analytics," and Marcus pressed. "There's a clear pattern," Diane said grimly. "On flights where Claire Wilson was assigned to first-class minority passengers, rated service quality 42%, lower on average than non-minority passengers. The discrepancy is statistically significant." Marcus exhaled slowly, absorbing the data he'd always suspected was buried in the system's blind spots. "Have we informed the board?" "Yes. Chairman Chen has called for an emergency meeting first thing tomorrow. You've been granted full discretion to address the issue however you see fit until then." Across the aisle, Mr. Whitman watched the exchange like a man witnessing a shift in corporate gravity. Diane glanced back toward the cabin. "Would you like to disembark and rejoin us after debriefing?" Marcus shook his head. "No, I want to finish this flight with the passengers I boarded it with, and I'd like to speak to them before we continue. They deserve that much." Diane didn't hesitate. "Of course. We'll bring the replacement crew aboard and prep the intercom." As she turned to make arrangements, several passengers approached Marcus, some with tentative gratitude, others with stories. A young man in a tailored blazer whispered, "I've been flying for years. I've had moments like this. I just never had the position to speak up." "Thank you," a black woman from business class added. "I've seen it happen. Silent, subtle. You just made it undeniable." Marcus listened to each one, not as a CEO, not even as a board member, just as someone who understood. Then came the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," the interim purser's voice rang out, "we'll be continuing our journey to San Francisco in approximately 30 minutes. A new crew is on board. Captain Lindstrom will be piloting the remainder of the flight. And before we depart, Mr. Reynolds has requested a few words." Marcus stepped toward the front of the cabin as a hush fell once again. He picked up the intercom. "My name is Marcus Reynolds," he began, voice clear and unshaken. "And like many of you, I boarded this flight expecting professionalism, dignity, and fairness. What I received was deliberate disrespect, denial of service, and ultimately proof that discrimination still flies first class." Gasps and quiet nods filled the space. "What some of you may not know is that I am a part owner of Elite Airways. 3 years ago, I invested in this company, not just with capital, but with the belief that we could become an industry leader in equitable travel experiences." He paused, scanning the eyes watching him. Today, that belief was tested, but also reaffirmed. Because you spoke, you watched, you chose not to look away. And that made the difference. A woman in economy visibly wiped away a tear. As a result, Marcus continued, the crew responsible for today's incident has been suspended. Surveillance systems captured everything. Legal, HR, and executive leadership are now involved. And when we land, this flight will not just continue, it will represent a new standard. The applause started tentatively, then grew into a wave. Marcus placed the mic down gently and stepped back. Behind him, Diane gave him a subtle nod of acknowledgement. Around him, the atmosphere had shifted once more, not from silence to noise, but from resentment to resolve. Passengers who had once doubted now believed. not just in the system, but in the power of being seen. And Marcus Reynolds, quiet, dignified, unshaken, had made sure they all felt it. The cabin door closed behind the replacement crew with a subtle click, a sound that under normal circumstances would have meant very little. But today it meant everything. It marked the beginning of a flight reborn, a reset not just of aircraft logistics, but of accountability, culture, and power. Captain Sarah Lindstrom. A seasoned pilot with silver-streaked hair and a demeanor of steady competence stepped into the first-class cabin and made direct eye contact with Marcus as she offered a respectful nod. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, "it's an honor. I'm here to get us to San Francisco safely, and I assure you, my crew and I are committed to the highest level of service for every passenger equally." Marcus returned the nod. "Thank you, Captain. I'm looking forward to the rest of the journey." She smiled and disappeared into the cockpit. Marcus settled back into seat 2A, the same position where everything had begun. But the air around him had changed. Passengers now passed him glances that weren't just curious, they were reverent, respectful. Some quietly mouthed, "Thank you." Others simply held his gaze with a look that said, "I saw. I understand." The intercom crackled again. "Flight attendants prepare for departure." As the aircraft began taxiing to the runway, Diane slipped into the seat beside Marcus, temporarily her tablet already glowing with updates. "We've received word from the FAA," she said quietly. "They're opening an inquiry into the flight's diversion. There's concern that it was not based on a legitimate safety issue, but retaliation." Marcus didn't flinch. It wasn't. And the footage proves it. "They've requested a copy," Diane confirmed. "We've sent it." "Good," Marcus said. "Let the system review itself for once." She glanced at him, then lowered her voice further. "There's another matter. Claire and Michael are already retaining union counsel. They're claiming you used your position to intimidate them." Marcus turned to her. Did the footage catch her saying, "People like him don't belong in first class"? Diane nodded. "Then, I'm not worried." The aircraft began its takeoff roll, the engines roaring as the jet surged forward. The cabin tilted backward with the acceleration, and the city lights of Denver quickly faded beneath a layer of clouds. At 36,000 feet, the new flight attendants moved through the cabin with practiced grace. Hot towels were offered, and Marcus, for the first time that day, accepted one without hesitation. This crew didn't flinch. They didn't avoid him. They didn't offer forced smiles or avoid eye contact. They served with dignity, and more importantly, they saw him. When dinner service began, a new attendant. A young woman named Erin approached with a composed demeanor. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, "we have your pre-ordered meal ready. Chef's salmon with truffle risotto, paired with the Macallan 18 as requested." She placed the meal gently before him on a white linen cloth. A proper setting, polished silverware, stemmed glass, real respect. He nodded his thanks. Erin gave a professional smile, not forced, not performative, just honest. Across the aisle, Whitman raised his own glass toward Marcus in a silent toast. "To correction," he said simply. Marcus clinked his glass without words. Halfway through the meal, his tablet chimed again. Jessica had forwarded a breaking news headline, "Breaking Elite Airways. Flight diverted after discrimination complaint by Black CEO. Crew, suspended investigation underway." The article was already being shared widely. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like First Class Justice Marcus Reynolds and Elite Accountability. Video clips were circulating Claire's remarks. Passengers applauding Marcus's speech, Diane boarding with the HR team. Jessica's message followed PR strategy holding. "We've prepared a statement emphasizing transparency, corrective action, and company values, but press is asking for you." Marcus typed back, "No comment. Not yet. Let the story be about what happened, not who I am." He placed the tablet down and took a slow sip of Macallan. This wasn't a moment for gloating. This was the midpoint of a much larger shift. Because even now, above the clouds, the real work was only beginning. As the aircraft sailed smoothly through the night sky, Marcus sat with his meal untouched, the food before him, a ceremonial token more than sustenance. He had won the first confrontation, but the war he was stepping into now wasn't about a sandwich or a seat. It was about the foundation of how institutions operated when no one thought they were being watched. Jessica's next update came in the form of a push alert, a notification from the Financial Tribune. Breaking Marcus Reynolds. Part owner of Elite Airways at center of in-flight discrimination scandal. The article was brutal and accurate. It detailed the full sequence of events from the moment the moldy sandwich hit his tray to the forced landing in Denver. It included anonymous passenger quotes, internal sources confirming HR action, and even Diane's statement about Elite's zero-tolerance policy. But it was the final paragraph that caught Marcus's eye. According to sources close to the board, Reynolds had silently pushed for systemic reforms over the past year, including a controversial surveillance initiative in premium cabins. Tonight, that system became the very proof that may shake Elite Airways to its core. He read the line again, then closed his eyes briefly. The surveillance program had been controversial from the start, fought by unions, scrutinized by privacy groups, and quietly mocked by senior crew. It had been marketed as a quality assurance system, but Marcus always knew the deeper truth. It was a mirror most weren't ready to see themselves in. He was pulled from his thoughts by a voice. Mr. Reynolds. It was Erin, the new flight attendant. Her face was calm, but her eyes held something more. Something conflicted. Yes, he replied. I just wanted to say, thank you, she said quietly, for standing up, for not letting it slide. He studied her for a moment. She couldn't have been more than 25. New to the job, no doubt trained to smile through abuse. He wondered what she'd seen already, how many subtle humiliations she'd witnessed, and said nothing about just to keep her job. You're welcome, Marcus said softly, but this isn't about me. It's about the system that made this possible. She nodded, understanding. We talk about it. In break rooms. In training. But no one ever actually does anything. They will now, Marcus said, or they'll be replaced. She smiled faintly and walked away. He turned back to his tablet, opened a fresh draft reform proposal, Phase 1. His fingers flew across the screen. Mandatory bias training across all cabin crews. Review committee for escalated complaints with independent oversight. Automatic escalation for 3 or more flagged service reports. Real-time crew performance feedback from premium cabin passengers. A second-tier audit of all customer satisfaction scores filtered by demographic. Expansion of surveillance systems with transparency and crew consent protocols. By the time he reached the last bullet point, the outline was already forming a document that would set a precedent in the airline industry. Another vibration. Jessica again. Board Chairman Chen wants you to present this personally. 8 a.m. sharp. Legal team will be present. He says, and I quote, we either confront this now or watch it burn later. Marcus replied, I'll be there. Send prep deck draft by 6 a.m. Just as he hit send, a news anchor's voice came from a passenger's tablet nearby. And in a dramatic mid-flight reversal, sources say the captain attempted to frame Mr. Reynolds as a disruption. Footage captured from the cabin now tells a very different story. Other passengers leaned in. Someone gasped. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Whitman turned toward Marcus again. Careful, he said. You're becoming a symbol. I didn't ask to be, Marcus replied. No one ever does, Whitman said. But symbols change things, and that Marcus knew was the danger. When people made you a symbol, they either wanted to follow you or destroy you. He opened one last message from Jessica. Union is pushing back. Claire and Michael releasing statements. Claim you manipulated surveillance, calling this a vendetta. He typed, let them talk. We have truth. Let's see how it holds up against spin. He put the tablet away, folded his hands, and leaned back. 30,000 feet above the ground, surrounded by luxury and power, Marcus Reynolds had never felt the air so heavy with responsibility. Tomorrow wouldn't just be a meeting. It would be the beginning of a war against silence, against complicity, against the corporate camouflage that had allowed people like Claire to thrive unchecked. But tonight, in this cabin of altered dynamics and shifting glances, Marcus had quietly reclaimed something far greater than a meal. He had reclaimed narrative. The cabin descended once more into the hush of high-altitude normalcy. Coffee carts rolled down the aisle. Blankets were handed out. Passengers quietly watched movies, pretended to nap, or scrolled news headlines about the very flight they were sitting on. To everyone else, it looked like a return to order. But Marcus knew better. What had occurred was not resolution, it was delay. Systems never crumbled in public. They fractured quietly behind polished doors, and tomorrow those doors would swing open to reveal just how deep the cracks ran. Across the aisle, Whitman had dozed off, arms crossed, face composed. The man had stood beside Marcus without hesitation. And yet Marcus knew that even men like Whitman, well-meaning, observant, decent, could retreat when institutions closed ranks. Sympathy had limits. So did courage. His thoughts were interrupted by a new ping. Jessica, internal memo leaked. Anonymous staffer sent it to media, outlining Claire's complaint that cameras were used as weapons, accusing you of entrapment. Marcus didn't blink. He pulled up the HR policies on his screen and highlighted Section 14B, the clause Claire had signed acknowledging camera surveillance in premium cabins for quality and security purposes. Signed, dated, recorded. He forwarded it to Jessica. Post this with timestamp. Let them leak spin. We'll leak facts. Her response was swift. Done. You're trending worldwide. Reynolds flight. First-class justice now at 4.3 m, mentions. He locked the tablet and looked out the window. Below him, the country slept. Cities like scattered constellations. Roads winding through shadows. People down there unaware that a single act of disrespect at 37,000 feet had cracked open the hull of polite racism with corporate consequences. Marcus had seen it happen before. In meetings where someone said, "Let's not make it about race," as if race hadn't already been made of him the moment he walked into the room. In elevators where white executives clutched portfolios tighter, never noticing they were doing it. In press interviews where they labeled him articulate like it was a surprise. What Claire did wasn't new. She was just foolish enough to do it on camera. Another ping. This one internal. From Diane. Captain Hoffman has officially been placed on leave pending FAA inquiry. Legal is preparing a statement. Do you want to sign it or leave it to PR? He typed slowly. I'll sign it, but I want it rewritten first. Remove euphemisms. Say what happened. A pause. Then, understood. Draft incoming in 30 minutes. Marcus leaned back, but his mind didn't rest. Tomorrow would require more than footage and reports. It would require conviction and allies who wouldn't disappear when things became uncomfortable. The board would smile. They would nod. And some of them would work behind the scenes to make sure nothing really changed. Not because they were evil, but because they didn't think the system was broken. Just slightly bruised. He remembered a quote from his mentor in undergrad, "There is no neutral ground in injustice. If you stand in the middle, the weight of the system still leans on the oppressed." That truth had followed him into every boardroom. Now it was following him to war. Behind him, a passenger approached quietly. She looked to be in her late 50s, sharply dressed, and carried herself like a woman who'd spent decades navigating elite spaces with armor stitched into her professionalism. I just wanted to say, she began softly, that I've worked in this industry for 27 years, and I've seen what they did to you happen to others over and over, but never to someone with your power. Marcus looked up, giving her his full attention. Did you speak up? He asked, not accusing, just curious. Not always, she admitted. Sometimes I needed the job more than I needed to be right. But I'm speaking now. If you need people behind you when this explodes, call me. He nodded. What's your name, Amara? Regional Training Coordinator, Elite Airways. He extended his hand. Thank you, Amara. I won't forget that. She shook his hand, then returned to her seat. Marcus opened his notebook and scribbled one phrase: "Power doesn't corrupt. It reveals." The plane glided through the night like a courtroom suspended in the clouds. Everyone aboard had seen what happened. Everyone would tell the story differently. But no matter how it was retold online on paper behind closed doors, one thing was undeniable. This was no longer just about spoiled food. It was about a system that had looked Marcus in the eye and told him he didn't belong. And tomorrow, that system would have to answer for it. At 7:45 a.m., Marcus Reynolds stood at the entrance to the Elite Airways executive headquarters in San Francisco. The sky was overcast, the city hushed as if it too sensed what was about to unfold. Dressed in a tailored navy suit and charcoal tie, he carried no notes, no laptop, only a small leather portfolio and the weight of truth. Inside, a receptionist greeted him with a nervous smile. "Mr. Reynolds, the board is assembled in Conference Room A." He nodded, said nothing, and walked down the long glass hallway. Behind each translucent wall were departments' legal finance operations holding their collective breath. Staff paused mid-conversation as Marcus passed some whispering others simply watching. The events of the night before had spread through the corporate ranks like electricity. Everyone knew. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. He entered the boardroom without hesitation. 10 directors sat in leather-backed chairs around a crescent-shaped table. At the center sat Chairman Alan Chen, stoic, deliberate, and visibly tense. Beside him were Diane from HR and Greg Madsen from Legal. No coffee, no small talk. "Just the cold ritual of corporate crisis," Marcus Allen began. "Thank you for joining us on such short notice." Marcus nodded. "You summoned me." "I answer." Chen cleared his throat. "We're here to review the incident aboard Flight 347 and discuss the company's official position." "I've already filed a preliminary report," Marcus said, placing the leather folder on the table, "along with surveillance documentation, internal flag history, and demographic bias reports cross-referenced with crew assignments for the past 18 months. He opened the folder and slid a series of printouts across the table. Charts, timelines, transcripts. Diane chimed in. "Our internal investigation corroborates Mr. Reynolds' account. Multiple policy violations, confirmed use of racially coded language, failure to adhere to service protocols, inaction from supervising crew." Madsen added, "FAA is opening a formal inquiry. Public Relations is holding interviews pending this meeting's conclusions. We're trending globally." Another board member, Margaret Sue, spoke. "And what do you recommend, Marcus?" He didn't hesitate. Systemic reform. A murmur rippled across the room. The phrase made some directors visibly uneasy. Specifically, Marcus continued, "I want 1. Real-time bias response protocols on all flights. 2. Quarterly diversity audits of crew behavior. 3. Mandatory video ethics training across all departments. 4. Demographic-based analytics reviewed by an independent civil equity firm. 5. Claire Wilson and Michael Stone to be permanently barred from airline employment. 6. Captain Hoffman stripped of command pending federal clearance. 7. An open apology issued publicly to every passenger on Flight 347. Chairman Chen held up a hand. "Marcus, we understand your frustration, but this isn't about frustration." Marcus cut in. "It's about accountability. About showing passengers, especially those who've spent a lifetime being quietly diminished, that this airline sees them, hears them, respects them." A heavy pause followed. Then another director, Michael Arnett, offered the predictable resistance. "Let's not turn this into a referendum on race. We're dealing with isolated behavior." "No," Marcus replied calmly. "You're dealing with exposed behavior. What's isolated is how often people in your seats see it." He leaned forward. "I've flown this airline 86 times in the last 2 years. Not once have I been offered a greeting equal to my white counterparts in the same seat. Not once has my drink order arrived without a second look. And last night, I was fed a moldy sandwich while a flight attendant smirked. He placed a still image on the table, Claire's curled lip frozen in contempt. And now the world has seen it too. Margaret glanced at the image, then turned to Chen. What precedent do we set if we ignore this? Chen's jaw tightened. We don't ignore it. But we also don't blow up internal policy to pacify Twitter. Twitter didn't demand the landing, Marcus said. Claire did, by treating my existence like an inconvenience. Diane intervened. We need a vote. Chen nodded. Fine. All in favor of launching full-scale reform per Marcus's proposal? Raise your hands. Marcus scanned the room. One by one, hands went up. Margaret, Diane, the CFO, the VP of HR, the Director of Ops. Chen hesitated, then reluctantly raised his. Only Arnett abstained, arms crossed. Motion carries, Chen said. Marcus leaned back, not in triumph, but in resolve. He had just forced the institution to look in the mirror, and it blinked. The boardroom emptied slowly, leaving only Chairman Alan Chen and Marcus seated across from each other, the silence between them heavy with the residue of what had just occurred. A reform motion that had been unthinkable 24 hours ago now stood ratified, not because the board suddenly cared, but because Marcus had made it impossible not to. Chen finally broke the silence. You were smart, he said, his voice low. You didn't call press conferences. You didn't tweet. You let the evidence speak. Marcus didn't look up from the papers he was collecting. I learned a long time ago that loud power is temporary. Quiet power endures. Chen folded his hands, gaze narrowing. Do you think this fixes things? No, Marcus replied, but it starts something. And that's more than most companies ever do. Chen exhaled through his nose, leaning back in his chair. You've embarrassed a lot of people, Marcus. Internally. Externally. Claire's union is already threatening to sue for wrongful termination. Marcus placed a flash drive on the table and slid it forward. Here's the full audio from the cabin. Time-stamped. Her words, not mine. Chen looked at the drive, but didn't pick it up. She'll say you provoked her. I didn't speak until after she did, Marcus said coolly. And you know that. The chairman sighed and stood gathering his notes. Well, he muttered, you've thrown a wrench into our Q4 PR plan. Marcus stood too. Good. Maybe next time the plan will include dignity. Chen paused at the door. You've just shifted how this company does business. No, Marcus replied. I've revealed how it's been doing business all along. 2 hours later, Marcus entered Elite Airways media studio, where a public statement was about to be filmed. Diane and the head of communications were waiting, flanked by 2 camera techs and a teleprompter operator. Jessica, patched in via tablet, gave a thumbs up from the legal office. We're ready, she said. No changes to the script. No, Marcus replied, but I'm not reading that. Everyone looked up. He walked past the prepared statement on the teleprompter and stood in front of the camera. A producer adjusted the lighting. Another prepped the mic. Roll in 3, 2. Marcus looked into the lens, not with fire, but with certainty. My name is Marcus Reynolds. I am a co-owner and executive advisor at Elite Airways. And I'm here today not to protect a brand, but to confront a truth. Recently, during a routine flight, I was subjected to discriminatory treatment by 2 members of our crew. This was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of something deeper, something embedded in the culture of not just this airline, but many industries. Because what happened to me has happened to others. Too often, too quietly, too conveniently ignored. But this time, the camera didn't blink, the policy didn't hide, and the silence didn't hold. As of today, Elite Airways has launched a systemic reform program. Not because it looks good, but because it is overdue. Accountability will be the standard, dignity will be the expectation, and respect will not be conditional. To our passengers who have ever felt unseen, we see you. To our crew who lead with integrity, you are the standard. And to those who thought silence was safety, you were mistaken. We do not rise by avoiding discomfort. We rise by confronting it. Thank you. He stepped back. The room stayed still. No one said a word. Jessica's voice broke the silence that wasn't in the script. Marcus smiled faintly. Neither was the moldy sandwich. Later that afternoon, Claire's attorney held a press conference outside a union office flanked by supporters. Cameras rolled as she gave a carefully worded statement. I was following policy. I was never told the passenger had ownership interest in the company. I was reacting to what I believed was a breach of protocol. Reporters pushed back immediately. What about the slurs caught on tape? Claire's lawyer stepped in. Taken out of context. That audio should have never been recorded without her express consent. Within minutes, the statement was being dissected across every major outlet. CNN, Elite Airways crew member, denies racism, despite tape. Bloomberg whistleblower or PR disaster, Claire Wilson, faces backlash. Twitter she knew, and no excuses alight. Trending globally. But the most damning blow came not from media, but from within. Amara, the regional training coordinator who had spoken with Marcus mid-flight, released a signed internal memo outlining years of ignored complaints, discriminatory training gaps, and HR cover-ups. It was clear. It was backed by documents. And it was undeniable. Marcus read the leaked memo late that night as he sat alone in his apartment phone, buzzing endlessly beside him. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He just exhaled, long, deep, and exhausted. Because for the first time in a long time, something rotten had been dragged into daylight. And daylight, as always, didn't negotiate. The email hit the inboxes of every Elite Airways employee at 6:02 a.m. sharp. Subject line bold and chilling, "We're done being quiet," open letter from Elite flight crew. It was unsigned by any single person, but the bottom was filled with names over 170 current and former crew members, attendants, and even gate agents. The letter was scathing, detailed, and clearly organized by insiders who had grown tired of watching while remaining invisible. For too long, we've been expected to smile while being complicit. We've watched qualified passengers be questioned for their attire, their accent, or the color of their skin. We've watched colleagues quietly shifted to less visible shifts after raising complaints. We've watched crew like Claire Wilson get promoted not in spite of their behavior, but because of their ability to make certain passengers uncomfortable. We're done. We stand with Mr. Reynolds. We stand with accountability. Marcus read it in his office, barely blinking. His phone was already lighting up. Jessica called first. "This wasn't coordinated with us," she said quickly. "We didn't prompt this." "I know," Marcus replied. "That's what makes it real." Her voice softened. "It's powerful. Media's calling it the elite exodus. They're comparing it to other whistleblower movements." "Good," Marcus said. "Let them. The culture needs a rupture." Outside the office windows, the city buzzed as another day began, but inside Elite's upper floors, the mood was anything but routine. The HR wing looked like a war room meetings behind closed doors, execs pacing, and Diane running point on dozens of simultaneous inquiries. When Marcus entered the room, hushed. Diane didn't waste time. "We've received over 40 internal discrimination complaints in the past 24 hours, most from long silent employees, some from senior staff." "Are they credible too?" "Detailed not to be," she said. "We've confirmed at least 11 involve direct reports of Claire Wilson. Others are tied to Michael Stone, and even a former chief purser now on leave." And the union retreating Diane replied, "They've gone from defense to damage control." Claire's attorney is now revising her statement. Michael has hired separate counsel. Marcus nodded slowly. "Prepare HR task forces. I want every complaint investigated. Thoroughly. Quietly. But transparently." Diane opened a thick folder. Already underway. Then she hesitated. "There's something else," she said. "We have an opportunity, but it comes with risk." He raised an eyebrow. "The Diversity and Ethics Committee," she said. "It's been inactive for years." Mostly a checkbox during audits, but with board approval, you could resurrect it, give it teeth, make it independent, report directly to shareholders and media. Marcus sat down. That's not just risk, that's revolution. Maybe Diane said, but it's also protection, not just for the company, but for you. He looked at her, studying the lines around her eyes, the fatigue, the worry, but also the resolve. Do it, he said. By noon, headlines were everywhere. Elite Airways crew speaks out. We've enabled racism too long. The Guardian CEO, Marcus Reynolds, refuses to back down. Bloomberg Elite Airways to reinstate independent ethics body. Reuters. The backlash came just as quickly. Shareholder groups issued statements demanding cost assessments. A former board member went on a right-wing podcast claiming Reynolds was weaponizing identity politics. An anonymous source leaked a slide from a 2019 HR deck labeled Passenger Profiling Indicators, a relic from a discriminatory training module, quietly buried during an earlier restructuring. But the momentum was too strong now. Truth had gone viral. And in homes across America, the flight had become a metaphor. It wasn't about a sandwich. It was about survival inside systems built to smile while suffocating you. That evening, Marcus sat with Amara, the training coordinator, who had released the internal memo. They met in a quiet corner booth of a Black-owned cafe in Oakland. No cameras, no entourage. Just two professionals with stories to exchange. Why now, he asked her. She stirred her coffee, thoughtful. Because silence costs too much. Every time I said nothing, I paid for it in pieces of myself. He nodded. You may have started something bigger than either of us. I didn't start it, she replied. You just lit the fuse. A text came through Marcus's phone as she spoke. Jessica again. Breaking FAA has opened formal review of all elite crew training logs from past 5 years. Pressure from Congress. They want a hearing. Marcus put the phone down. Amara, he said, how do you feel about testifying before a federal oversight panel? She didn't flinch. If they'll listen, I'll speak. He smiled faintly. Then, get ready. The altitude's about to get higher. 3 days after the flight that shocked the internet, Marcus Reynolds stepped into a congressional hearing room in Washington, D.C. The marble floors and high ceilings were meant to intimidate, but to Marcus, they only echoed. The room was packed media in the back rows. Staffers scribbling notes and a panel of sharply dressed lawmakers with furrowed brows. The nameplate before him read, Mr. Marcus Reynolds, co-owner Elite Airways. To his right sat Amara poised in a slate-gray blazer. She'd practiced her statement a dozen times, but the calm in her eyes now wasn't rehearsed. It was righteous. Representative Karen Sandoval, chair of the Aviation Oversight Committee, adjusted her microphone. This hearing is now in session. Our focus today, systemic discrimination in commercial aviation, with specific attention to Elite Airways and the incident aboard Flight 347. Marcus inhaled slowly, then began. What happened on that flight was not an anomaly, he said clearly. It was a moment caught on camera that happens quietly to others every day. It happened to me, but it didn't start there, and it doesn't end there unless we confront the root. Flashbulbs went off. Reporters leaned in. Social media hashtags surged again. Flight 347, testimony. Listen to Marcus, Amara speaks. Congresswoman Sandoval pressed further. Mr. Reynolds, you've submitted evidence of bias patterns across Elite Airways. Can you summarize your findings? Marcus opened his folder, pulling out a color-coded heat map of customer complaints. Over the past 18 months, passengers of color, especially black passengers in first class, were 6 times more likely to receive downgraded service scores. In nearly all cases, the feedback was buried. In 5 retaliatory notes were added to their profiles. And the crew, Sandoval asked. Those involved in the incidents were never disciplined. In some cases, they were promoted. A murmur rippled through the room. Marcus continued, We speak a lot about inclusion in this country, but what we rarely admit is that exclusion isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a look, a cold sandwich, a delay in eye contact, your seat is over there, before checking a ticket. That's how it works. Quiet erosion of dignity. Then it was Amara's turn. I've trained over 3,000 Elite Airways employees, she said, voice steady. We were told to avoid profiling, but never told how to recognize our own. The culture rewarded those who kept the system calm. Not fair, just calm. The message was clear. If someone makes a fuss, downplay it. Isolate them. Move on. Congressman Malik Harris, the only black lawmaker on the panel, leaned forward. Why do you think your testimony is different now? Amara didn't hesitate, because someone with power finally refused to be silent. The room went quiet. Later, as cameras clicked in the corridor outside the chamber, Marcus and Amara stood side by side. Reporters swarmed with questions. Mr. Reynolds, are you considering expanding reforms to other airlines? Will you push for federal legislation? Are you concerned about backlash from corporate allies? Marcus raised a hand for silence. I'm not here for optics, he said. I'm here because culture doesn't shift with slogans. It shifts when people risk comfort for justice. We're ready to help draft policy. We're ready to support reform across the industry. And we're not backing down. One reporter pushed in. What would you say to people who believe this is just about a sandwich? He paused. I'd say, if you think this is about a sandwich you've never had to prove your worth, just to sit where you paid to sit. The crowd hushed again. Amara nodded beside him. That night, Marcus returned to San Francisco and found a handwritten note waiting on his office desk. No signature, just block letters on ivory stationery. I watched the hearing. Thank you for making them see what we live. He didn't know who left it. Maybe it didn't matter. What mattered was the shift, the tone. The silence that used to sit so thick in the air around these issues was starting to break. The next morning, Elite Airways announced its full partnership with 2 federal equity monitors and voluntarily released 5 years of internal data for third-party review. Other airlines took notice. Privately at first calls to legal departments, quiet rewrites of training decks hastily scheduled executive retreats. And then, publicly. Jetson Airlines issued a statement 2 days later. We commend Mr. Reynolds and the crew of Flight 347 who chose integrity over inertia. We are initiating our own full-scale inclusion audit, effective immediately. Delta followed. Then Western Skies. Then Horizon Link. The ripple had begun. Back in Oakland, Amara stood at a podium at a community town hall. You don't need to be a CEO to speak up, she said to the crowd. You just need to stop pretending that silence is neutral. A young flight attendant stood in the back of the room, tears in her eyes. She hadn't spoken during the last 2 bias trainings, but this time she raised her hand. My crew lead said last week, don't pull a Marcus. But I want to. I want to be one. The room clapped. Not politely, but like something had finally burst free. And outside, as the sun fell over the bay, a new kind of boarding call was being heard, not from an airline, but from a nation finally willing to look up. The new employee orientation at Elite Airways didn't look like it had in years past. Gone were the glossy videos with vague promises of diversity and world-class service. In their place stood Amara, now promoted to Director of Cultural Reform, flanked by 2 former federal ethics consultants and a recently hired equity design strategist. Standing before 45 new recruits, Amara took a breath and said the words she wished someone had once said to her. You're not just here to serve. You're here to see, to notice, to act. The room was quiet, respectful. Among the faces were people from every background: Black, Asian, Latino, Indigenous, white. And for the first time in her career, Amara felt like they weren't checking a box. She felt like they were planting something. Elsewhere, Marcus sat at a round-table meeting with executives from 6 different airlines: Jetson, Delta, Horizon Link, Aero Blue, Skywind, and Coastal. Each had sent their highest-ranking compliance officers, some bringing lawyers, others showing up with notepads and carefully worded questions. But Marcus, sitting without legal backup, addressed them plainly. You invited me here to understand what we did differently, so let me start by telling you what we didn't do. We didn't spin. We didn't scapegoat. We didn't deflect. We listened. Then we rebuilt. A Skywind VP leaned forward. And how did you avoid alienating the crew our unions are worried about targeting? We didn't target, Marcus said. We revealed, and then we gave everyone a choice: step forward with the mission or step aside. Another executive asked, what was the employee response? Mixed. At first he admitted. But when your actions prove you're serious, the right people rise, and the wrong people leave. He paused, then added, and that's exactly what we want. There was silence, then nods. A shift not of agreement, but of understanding. That same week, Elite Airways launched a new ad campaign, not with models or music or staged smiles, but with truth. The 60-second national spot began not in the sky, but in the cabin of Flight 347, actual footage of Marcus quietly pressing the call button. Then the recorded words of Claire Wilson, the moment the sandwich hit the tray. The silence that followed. Then came the line, bold and unflinching. When we failed to serve with dignity, we listened, we acted, we changed, and we're still changing, because flying should lift everyone. The ad ended with Amara standing at the head of a training room saying only, this time we mean it. It aired during prime time, on all networks. The response was thunderous. Some praised it. Others protested. A few called it performative, but no one ignored it. And for Marcus, that was the point. Visibility had always been power's first language. Now it was being spoken fluently. One night, while reviewing a new training module in his office, Marcus received a knock. It was Diane. I thought you'd gone home, he said. I did, she replied, but I came back. Something you should see. She handed him a manila envelope. Inside were 3 letters unsigned but typed with raw honesty. All were from current Elite employees. The first was from a white male pilot. I've spent 27 years in this industry. I've seen things I've ignored. I won't ignore them anymore. Thanks to what you did, I now see my silence wasn't neutral. It was permission. The second from a gate agent in Charlotte. After 14 years of brushing off complaints and calling them misunderstandings, I finally understand what harm looks like. Thank you for helping me unlearn. The third short but powerful, my daughter saw the footage. She asked me if I ever stood up for someone like you. I told her no, but tomorrow I will. Marcus sat back. For a long time he didn't speak. Then, legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you wake up in other people. Diane smiled softly. Well, in that case, you've already started building yours. And outside that office window, the planes kept landing, taking off, moving people to places they'd never been, just as they always had. But now, in first class and coach at the gate in the cockpit, change was sitting beside them. Not loud, not grand, just present. Just waiting for someone to press the call button again and find this time that someone answers with respect. It began with a memo, just 5 lines, sent quietly, no bold fonts, no grand announcement. Effective immediately, all crew bias complaints will bypass local management and go directly to the Office of Equity Enforcement. Signed, Marcus Reynolds. Within an hour, 87 employees used the form. By day's end, the number had tripled. Stories poured in. Some were recent passengers denied pre-boarding, despite disability tags. Others dated back years. Accusations buried retaliation disguised as retraining. But this time, something was different. This time, people believed they would be heard. At Flight Academy Terminal C, Amara stood before a class of senior flight attendants during recertification week. They were seasoned, many had been in the air since the late 90s. Some looked skeptical. Others looked tired. A few leaned back with folded arms expecting another PR workshop. But Amara didn't open with data. She opened with a question. How many of you have been told to smile after being insulted? A few heads tilted, one hand raised, then another. She nodded. Now how many of you were told the passenger was having a bad day, or that you were being too sensitive? Almost every hand rose. She stepped forward. That's where it begins. The normalization of disrespect, the hierarchy of whose pain matters. And from there, it becomes easy to ignore when a colleague mocks a name, or when a passenger in 3C gets a second coffee, while the one in 2A never gets their first. Silence. She let it sit before continuing. I'm not here to shame you. I'm here to invite you. Because we can't teach dignity from a manual. We have to live it. One veteran attendant stood. You really think we can change a culture that's been flying the same way for decades? Amara looked her in the eye. No, she said. I think you can. The woman sat down, but this time she leaned forward. Elsewhere, Marcus met with a group of former critics investors who had once warned him not to politicize customer experience. They were high-net-worth stakeholders, people who could shift a company's stock price with a single call. Your quarterly numbers look strong, one began cautiously, but some of our partners are still concerned about brand alignment. Marcus nodded. Define alignment. Well, the investor cleared his throat. Some customers feel alienated by the attention on racial dynamics. They just want to fly in peace. They've always flown in peace, Marcus replied. It's the rest of us who've had to fly under scrutiny. Another spoke up. And if this creates legal liability, Marcus opened a report. We've cut liability by 22% in the past quarter alone. Fewer incident escalations. Higher passenger satisfaction across demographics. Employee retention up 11%. You want stability. This is it. Silence. Then a reluctant chuckle. You're very good at this, Marcus. I'm not selling optics, he said. I'm selling a future. Back at HQ, Diane walked into Marcus's office, holding a stack of reports. We've reviewed 412 submissions to the new equity portal, she said. Dozens are actionable. Good, he replied. Process them. No delays. Let the crew see consequences and restoration. She hesitated before adding, You should know, Claire Wilson's attorney submitted a request for reinstatement. Marcus looked up stone still. She claims wrongful termination. Says the footage was manipulated. She's also accusing Amara of retaliation. He didn't flinch, just stared out the window for a long moment. Then quietly deny it and file a cross-claim for defamation. Diane nodded. And then, with a rare softness, she asked, Do you ever get tired, Marcus? He smiled faintly. Only when I pretend this is about me. That night, a viral video surfaced. It showed a young black boy on an Elite Airways flight seated in first class. He looked nervous, awkward in his oversized suit jacket, fidgeting with the seatbelt. The flight attendant, a white woman in her late 50s, knelt beside him with a smile. You belong here, she said gently. Can I get you some apple juice, Mr. Carter? The boy nodded shyly. Across the aisle, someone recorded it. The caption read, From moldy sandwiches to this. Thank you, Elite. Reynolds effect. Within 24 hours, the video hit 14 million views. The comments flooded in. This is what change looks like. Not a policy. A moment. Hope flies first class now. And in his quiet office, Marcus watched the clip alone. He didn't post it. He didn't repost it. He simply saved it. Because change doesn't always come with headlines. Sometimes it comes with a child smiling in a seat no one once believed he deserved. The ripple effect of Flight 347 had moved beyond boardrooms and flight paths. It had reached schools, churches, barbershops, and now the classroom of Lincoln Middle School in Atlanta. Ms. Daly, a 6th-grade civics teacher, had swapped the day's lesson on the Constitution for something more immediate. Her students were watching the Congressional hearing of Marcus Reynolds. They weren't just watching. They were writing. Letters. Dear Mr. Reynolds, one student read aloud. I never knew someone like me could own a piece of a plane. You made me believe I can sit anywhere. Another added, Thank you for not yelling. Thank you for showing me that silence can be strength, too. By the end of the period, 27 letters sat in a manila envelope addressed in blue marker, Marcus Reynolds. Elite Airways Headquarters, San Francisco, CA. They didn't know if he'd read them, but they knew he mattered. In New York City, an unexpected guest walked into a small law firm off 47th Street. It was Claire Wilson. Hair tied up, no makeup, no entourage. She didn't walk in to sue. She walked in to sign a statement, a confession. The firm had been working with civil rights groups to collect testimony from airline staff past and present. Claire's name had been whispered often, usually in fear. But today, she came alone. "I want to come clean," she said, "not because I got caught, because I finally watched the footage without defending myself." She handed them a signed affidavit, 12 pages, detailing years of casual cruelty, targeted exclusions, biases she never examined. "I believed I was just doing my job," she admitted, "but I made flying unsafe for people who looked like him." She looked up at the attorney. "I want this made public." He hesitated. "You know what this will mean for you?" Claire nodded. "I already lost the job. Maybe it's time I try to get back my humanity." At Elite San Francisco headquarters, Marcus received the envelope of letters from Lincoln Middle. He read every one. And when he got to the letter from a boy named Tyrone, who wrote, "They never let my mama sit in first class. But one day, I will take her there." He stood up, walked into Diane's office, and said, "Book me a flight to Atlanta." The visit wasn't announced. There were no reporters, no corporate videographers, just a guest speaker stepping quietly into a public school classroom. When Marcus walked in, Ms. Daly gasped, then laughed nervously. The kids froze. "You're really him," one girl whispered. He smiled. "That depends. Who do you think I am?" "You're the one who didn't let them treat you like you were less," said another student. "You made it stop." Marcus stepped to the front. "I didn't make it stop," he said. "I made it seen. And once the world sees something broken, the people who can stop it have a choice." He paused. "And you all. One day you'll be those people." Then he opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of cards. Each one was a mock boarding pass. It had the name of a student. And the seat, 1A. First class one by one, he handed them out. "Not because it's about a seat," he said, "but because it's about belief. The kind that says you belong anywhere your character can carry you." The room erupted. Back in San Francisco, a mural had gone up on the side of Terminal B. It wasn't commissioned by Elite. It was painted overnight by a local collective of Black artists. The image showed Marcus standing in front of an aircraft door, not stepping onto the plane, but holding the door open for others. Behind him, a crowd of shadowed figures began to rise. A janitor, a nurse, a student, a young girl in church shoes, and in the clouds above them, etched faintly in the blue, were the words, "Flight 347, the day we all boarded differently." No one dared paint over it. No one dared call it graffiti. It was framed the next week. A plaque placed beneath it simply read, "Donated by the people, to the people," because of one passenger who didn't stay seated. At his apartment, Marcus stood at the window watching another jet soar into the twilight. Amara called. "You see the mural I did," he said. "I didn't ask for it." "You didn't have to," she replied. "That's the thing about legacy. It arrives whether you plan for it or not." He turned back to the letters from Lincoln Middle, still spread across his table. "You think they'll remember this 10 years from now?" "I think they'll remember you," she said, "not because you were a CEO, but because you made the cabin look more like them." He nodded, then looked at the empty seat across the table. "Next time I fly," he said softly, "I'm taking one of those kids with me." The story of Flight 347 no longer belonged to Marcus Reynolds. It had become case law in corporate ethics classes. It was cited in HR training decks across Fortune 500 companies. And at a Harvard symposium on leadership reform, his name was referenced not for his business acumen, but for his refusal to let silence define policy. Marcus was invited to speak, but he declined. He didn't want a standing ovation. He wanted implementation. That same month, a law firm in Chicago revised its onboarding policy to include a required workshop called the Reynolds Doctrine, a framework for recognizing microaggressions in client engagement. A luxury hotel chain adopted new guest interaction audits, citing the Flight 347 standard. A university in Texas added the incident to its sociology curriculum. And at a summit on aviation innovation, Delta's CEO stated plainly, "We missed it. Marcus Reynolds didn't." And now we're playing catch-up. Back at Elite Airways, something curious began to happen. Crew members, many of whom had never spoken up before, started correcting behavior in real time. A gate agent named Dev, witnessing a colleague refer to a Nigerian passenger as difficult for asking about pre-boarding policy, stepped in gently and said, "That's not difficult. That's called being thorough." Let's get it right. No meeting, no reprimand, just accountability. Another flight attendant, Maria, interrupted a lead's joke about another loud boarding group and said calmly, "Not funny anymore." No training module had told her to say it. The culture had. Marcus had once told his board, "We don't rise by avoiding discomfort. We rise by confronting it." Now, discomfort wasn't something to be sidestepped. It was a cue, a signal to lean in. Amara noticed it first. On a red-eye from LAX to Newark, she sat anonymously in row 17C, watching the crew navigate a tense situation between two passengers. One, visibly frustrated, complained that he didn't want to sit next to someone who smells like curry. The crew didn't ignore it. They didn't apologize to the aggressor. They upgraded the targeted passenger, brought him a warm towel, asked if he wanted a complimentary drink, and offered the man who complained a rebooking on a different flight. No chaos, no headlines. Just quiet, principled action. Amara watched it unfold, fighting tears. They were getting it. Elsewhere, Claire Wilson sat in a community accountability circle at a nonprofit in Oakland. It had been 5 months since her termination. She wasn't there under court order. She had walked in on her own. "I spent most of my career thinking I was protecting the cabin," she said. "But what I really protected was hierarchy and fear." A young man across from her, a former TSA agent, nodded. "I used to profile everyone with a foreign accent," he admitted. "Thought I was doing my job." Claire looked at him. "I thought so too," she said. "But turns out, doing your job isn't the same as doing what's right." They sat in silence, not with shame, but with understanding. On a rooftop in San Francisco, Marcus and Diane met for a quiet drink. It was the 1-year anniversary of the flight. No press, no live stream. Just two colleagues with a bottle of wine and a view of the sky. Diane handed him a small box. Inside was a silver lapel pin in the shape of a call button. "I thought you might want a reminder," she said. He smiled. "I never wanted this," he said. "The spotlight, the symbolism. But you didn't run from it either," she said. "That's the difference. Below them, planes lined up on final approach. But up here, the world felt still." Then Diane said something unexpected. "I'm retiring next quarter." Marcus turned to her, surprised. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "It's time. I want to leave when we're building, not when we're patching." He raised his glass. "To new chapters." She clinked his. "And to the ones we never planned." The next morning, Marcus boarded Flight 811 to Atlanta. Seat 1A was already occupied by Tyrone, the boy from Lincoln Middle, now a year older, still wearing a blazer, but this time it fit. He had grown into it. "Ready?" Marcus asked. Tyrone grinned. "You serious?" Marcus handed him a menu. "Pick anything, but skip the sandwich." They both laughed. As the plane ascended, Marcus looked out the window, not down at the world, but up, because now even the sky didn't feel high enough. The email subject line was unassuming: Invitation United Global Ethics Summit, keynote slot. Confirmation. Marcus Reynolds stared at it for a long time. He had declined invitations before, dozens in fact. Ever since the incident aboard Flight 347, his name had become synonymous with quiet disruption. The CEO who said nothing when humiliated and everything after. But this one was different. Because this wasn't just about aviation anymore. It was about leadership, global systems, dignity at altitude and on the ground. He clicked accept. 3 weeks later, he stood behind a glass podium in Geneva. World leaders, economists, tech giants, and social reformers filled the massive hall. Many had heard of Marcus Reynolds, but few had heard from him. Until now. He opened simply. I wasn't supposed to be here. The crowd stirred. I was supposed to eat my sandwich, drink my water, and stay seated until landing. That's how the system was designed. Not overtly, not violently, just politely, just quietly enough to make dignity optional. He paused, but I've learned that silence when used with purpose is more powerful than protest shouted into a storm. Silence with intent. Silence that gathers receipts. Silence that allows injustice to write its own obituary. The hall was quiet. No rustling. No coughing. He continued. What happened aboard Flight 347 didn't begin there. And it didn't end when Claire Wilson was fired. It didn't end with hearings. Or ad campaigns. Or murals. It's not ending now. Because justice isn't a moment. It's a maintenance. A slide appeared behind him. It showed a photo of the call button from his flight. The one he pressed when handed the moldy sandwich. That button, he said, wasn't answered. But I did get a response. It just came from the world. As he stepped down from the stage, hands rose. People wanted to shake his. Photographers clicked rapidly. But Marcus moved quietly through them all. He had never liked spotlights. He preferred clarity. Meanwhile, back in the U.S., Elite Airways had just completed its first ever civic accountability audit, not because it was required, but because it was written into their new bylaws. Amara led the final presentation. In 12 months she began, we've increased passenger satisfaction by 28%, reduced customer complaints involving racial bias by 72%. Internal trust scores among crew are up 19%. She flipped to the next slide. And most importantly, over 200-300 employees have completed voluntary equity leadership certification. The room applauded. But Amara held up a hand. We're not finished. We never will be. Because culture isn't changed by one person or even 1 year. It's changed by constant courage. Elsewhere, Claire Wilson taught a workshop. The title, Unlearning to Relearn. Accountability in Practice. She stood before a group of corporate managers, none of whom knew her as the woman from the flight. She never mentioned it. Instead, she opened with a question. When was the last time you examined your default reaction to someone who looks unfamiliar? The room fell still. And from there, she didn't shame. She invited. Because redemption, she had learned, isn't given. It's chosen. At Lincoln Middle School, Tyrone gave a speech to his class titled, The Seat I Sat In. He told the story of the flight. The blazer? The juice? But it wasn't about the seat, he said. It was about being seen. And I want everyone to know, you don't need a CEO to make you feel worthy. You already are. He ended with a line his mother helped him practice. Next time I board a flight, I'll carry my community with me. In every step. In every smile. His teacher cried. So did 2 classmates. Marcus sat alone one night reviewing Elite's annual vision report. The final page had one sentence. The measure of our altitude is not how high we fly, but how many we lift along the way. He closed the binder, poured a drink, then instinctively picked up his phone and texted Amara. Let's talk tomorrow about what comes after legacy. She replied instantly, already ahead of you. We're not building monuments. We're building systems. Somewhere, another passenger pressed a call button. This time, someone answered. Not just with water, but with dignity. Marcus Reynolds never set out to become a symbol. He never asked for hashtags, murals, or documentaries. He never planned to ignite a national reckoning. All he wanted on that flight was to eat, rest, and arrive. But the moldy sandwich wasn't just a meal gone bad. It was a message. It told him, you don't belong here. It told him, you can pay the price, but never sit in peace. It told him, your dignity is disposable. And instead of raising his voice, Marcus did something far more radical. He listened, he watched, he documented. He turned an act of casual cruelty into a case study in silent revolution. The legacy of Flight 347 wasn't defined by punishment. It wasn't about firing one woman. It was about teaching a system to hear what it had ignored for decades. Subtle bias, institutional gaslighting, the soft cruelty of lowered expectations. And Marcus never shouted. He simply proved what power can do when it walks with principle instead of privilege. Years later, passengers still board Elite Airways differently. They notice. They speak up. They press call buttons, not in fear, but with faith. Crew members no longer whisper behind curtains. They hold each other accountable in the open. First class is no longer defined by luxury. It's defined by equity. Because Marcus changed something deeper than policies. He changed the altitude of human dignity. Tyrone, now a high school senior, tells the story of his flight in college essays and speeches. He calls it his boarding pass to belief. He says, "I didn't sit in 1A that day. I stood in it for every kid who's ever been told to shrink." And when asked what he wants to be, he smiles and answers, "Someone who opens doors just like Mr. Reynolds." Meanwhile, Claire Wilson, once shunned and silenced, now speaks to executives about the cost of unchecked comfort. Her keynote is titled, "From Enforcer to Educator: Why I Listened Too Late." She opens with a line that silences every room I was, once the reason a man pressed a call button in pain. Now I teach others how to answer it with humanity. As for Marcus, he flies less now. He mentors more. He funds scholarships for marginalized students entering aviation and ethics. His foundation. The Reynolds Initiative for Equity in Service now partners with 5 global airlines and 25 universities. But he never talks about the sandwich. He talks about the silence that followed, and how it was broken, not by outrage, but by resolve. In a rare interview, Marcus once said, "Justice doesn't knock down doors. It stands at them, waiting, until enough of us decide to open them." That's what he did. He opened a door, not to revenge, to restoration, to rebuilding. If you walk through Terminal B at San Francisco International Airport, you'll find a plaque by Gate 12 in honor of those who pressed call buttons and waited. This time, we answered. There is no photo of Marcus, no statue, just a button, encased in glass, lit from behind, always glowing. Because in the end, his legacy wasn't that he fired a racist flight attendant. His legacy was that he made the skies safer, not just for those who looked like him, but for everyone. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to catch more gripping stories like this. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.